Hello, everyone. My name is Denise Cordero. I'm a holistic life coach and soul mentor. You are tuning in to Diving Deep with Denise. This podcast intends to create a sisterhood, a tribe of women that gets to have raw and authentic conversations, all expressions of what it is to be embodied as a woman. Through the vulnerable sharing of our stories, we get to invite other women to share theirs, to be empowered, to be healed, and to boldly step into their authenticity and their truth. I am so honored today because our guest, Anessa Collins, is all about truth and authenticity. She is the SheEO 1.0 coach, guiding female creative solopreneurs into authentic leadership. And she's been in the coaching space for, get this, 14 years and counting. So thank you for being with me here, Anessa. It's truly an honor to have this session with you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. So when I was reading your bio, there were certain things that just like stood out off the page. Of course, we're going to share your bio and with our audience, but the beautiful thing is that you get to tell your story. Please, please, please tell us, how did you get from farm girl fearing to farm girl leading and rising?
Oh, I'd be happy to share that with you. It's been a journey of getting back to me. So I think we often think that we have to become someone else. But for me, it was about going back to who I always was. I immediately went into corporate America. I grew up on a farm in a poor family with good parents. And I stepped into corporate America to chase my idea of what success meant: money, privilege, status, a nice car, an expensive home, all the things. Because that's what my idea of success looked like. That's what had been demonstrated to me from the outside world. And I spent years really thriving in corporate America, just killing it by all observations. But inside, I was so unhappy. So there was this rubbing, kind of like cancerous feeling inside of me of the disconnect between how I was behaving day to day and how I felt. I wasn't doing anything immoral or anything illegal. It's just that in certain situations, you feel like you have to act certain ways to be successful. And particularly in corporate, that's true. I had to be like everybody else, and I had to be better than everybody else at it to do well. But many of those things were quite opposite from who I am, right? And so you do that for so many years, and you get really scared to step out and even think about who you aren't anymore. So it took me a long time to realize, to even be aware that who I am and how I was working and acting and behaving in my work weren't aligned. I was clueless. I had no self-awareness about why I felt so uncomfortable in my own skin. It was like wearing bad shoes. You love them, they look hot, but they really hurt your feet. So it took me a long time to even figure out why I felt that way for so many years. And I was certainly a farm girl fearing, right? I was fearing trying to figure that out once I realized it was a disconnect. And I was fearing what that meant, how I was going to come up with questions that I had that I didn't have answers for. I had a baby. I quit corporate America, and I went through an entire process of trying to figure out who I was and where I had gone. Where did I go? Right? I opened a coaching practice in 2008, and I found so many professional women going through that same challenge. Where did I go? Where am I? Why did I start doing these things that made me successful but made me feel like crap? And that disconnect between our values and who we are, and then how we show up in the world to try to succeed, um, can be really painful. It can it can take a really long time for you to even realize that that's where you're at with yourself. So once you get there, you got to figure out how to fill that cup with the things that are you, after kind of extracting the things that aren't. Um, and after working with professional women for so many years, I come to realize that this is a path that many of us start to go down. And without really having the time to think about what you need and what's important to you, you can keep succeeding and feeling unfulfilled at the same exact time. And when I figured out that the success I'd had wasn't success for me, that's when I really felt like I stepped into a farm girl leading. That's when I finally found my leadership voice. Um, but excavating who I was took some time.
How was that journey for you? Because all of us that have gone through that transition, that are making that transformation, have been called by that self-awareness to realize that we are not being authentic and are ready to step into that. I think rarely we talk about how painful that process can be, that letting go, that shedding of the person that we used to be, the person that we believed, because we are also letting go with that certain ideals, the wealth, the success, the climb the ladder, whatever that success may look for someone. But there is definitely a letting go to step into something that is rather unknown. When you are looking for that, when you're asking that question, who am I? There's a lot of uncertainty there.
100%. There's a lot of uncertainty. And if you have been validating who you are through others, like I had been, right? My boss thinks I'm great. My clients think I'm great. My husband thinks I'm killing it. My parents are proud of me. If that's how I was validating my success, to set that aside and say, I don't really connect with that anymore, I have nothing else. So I had a total identity crisis.
Yeah.
And for me, being a new mom at home with a baby, I remember I had been home with them about 3 months, and I was tired, and I was sitting out on the back porch in the mountains where we lived. And I thought, this is the first time in my life, having started work at age 11, this is the first time I didn't have anybody around me saying, good job, way to go, you're killing it. Nobody does that when you're a new mom. Nobody cares. So all those props, right, that I got from everybody about how great I was and how fabulous I was doing were gone. They just vanished when I quit working and right before I opened my coaching practice, and I hit rock bottom. because my entire identity was about that old idea of success, not just in corporate America, but in things that even came before that. So it was a crumbling entirely of who I was. It reminds me of when you blow up a building and everything sinks into itself. Okay, it doesn't get projected out, it just collapses, and all that's left is just a pile of dust. And you're like, okay, this really hurts. And I'm embarrassed and I'm ashamed that I'm 37 years old and I still don't know who I am. What am I going to do about it? And for me, it was really about thinking back to the times when I knew who I was. So I went through a whole process, right? Journaling and kind of putting myself on a movie screen and saying, when was the last time you felt really like you and you were killing it and it felt so good? It was like breathing. You weren't struggling. And I was 12 years old the last time I really felt that way.
Oh, that young.
And I didn't figure this out until I was 37. So who was I in between all of those years? I was someone other people needed me to be. And I was someone who I thought I needed to be validated, to be considered successful, to be considered worthy. But I went through this whole process of looking back at myself and saying, when's the last moment you really felt totally yourself? And you could just live in that. It wasn't changing. There were moments, of course, during that time where I could touch base with that 12-year-old girl. I knew she was still there. She's just in the corner of the room. So she and I would touch base, but I couldn't embody her again. She was just there sort of watching me screw things up. And she'd wave every once in a while. Hello, remember, this is who you are. You've sort of forgotten me, but I haven't gone anywhere. If you would just reach back and bring me forward, you'd feel a lot better.
That's a beautiful visualization and a beautiful integration of our lost parts. Because that's the way that I see it sometimes, that we've left these lost parts, these beautiful soul parts of ourselves. And when we start doing the work, there's this amazing integration that comes together and brings us back into a reclaiming of our wholeness.
I think you're 100% right. And I always have this visual metaphor of, in the movies, when they take sheets and they cover up all the furniture because they're leaving their vacation home. Mm-hmm. And they're going to another home for a different season. And I always feel like the furniture stays there. You still have the chair and your favorite love seat and maybe your favorite ottoman, but it's covered up. And for me, that 12-year-old girl that I'd left behind was under a sheet. She was waiting for me to pull off the veil. She hadn't gone anywhere. She hadn't exploded. I had just covered her up with all my ideas about what I thought success needed to be. And it was so different from her that the conflict was just too great for the two of them to really coexist. And that's very painful. And there's a lot of women out there listening to us right now who have felt this, or who are feeling it, or feel something like it. And maybe just now are realizing that they too are in this place of conflict.
Yes. Yes. So what's coming up for me right now is that pain unavoidable? Because one of the things that I see, there seems to be this congruency where women come to this stage in their life, and it could be like in their later 30s or in their 40s. Maybe it's our midlife crisis, right? There is something that occurs that becomes this tipping point where we can no longer tolerate the life that we've led up until that point, and a change needs to occur. Is the pain necessary? Is there a way to invite women before they even get there to help them awaken, to help them make that paradigm shift?
I think it's a great question. I don't think the pain is necessary, but it requires those of us that have been on that journey to talk about it. We have to be willing to get up in front of strangers and in front of others and talk about the path that we traveled, because that gives the women then, the women now who are just encountering that path, it gives them an opportunity to see, to understand what could unfold for them and to make a different choice. But we can't make a different choice if we keep our stories to ourselves. If I kept my farm girl fearing story to myself, how can I possibly help others make a different choice?
That's awesome. Thank you. So the next question I had is why? So for our sisters that are listening, why? Why is it so important? Why is it so important to change? If you're getting what you want, if you're being successful, if you've got the house, you've got the money, you've got the red bottom pumps, so you have to make a couple of sacrifices. So you have to play the game a little bit. Why is it so important to be authentic?
It's a beautiful question. Why is it so important to be authentic? And I have a couple answers for you, I think. The first one is that if you deeply believe that we are all somehow connected, if you believe that, then what you don't step into, what you're not determined to change about yourself, gets passed down to the other women you interface with, to your kids, to your friends, because you're actually embodying something that they are looking up to. You're influencing them.
Yeah.
So long after your life ends here, that influence continues. And I think about the young women coming after us. And I think, yeah, this isn't something I have to do. I'm making good money. I get to travel. I have all the things. I can play the game.
Yeah.
But how am I influencing other people? And what kind of real change am I making in the lives of others? What kind of legacy am I leaving? If I project, if I demonstrate to you that this is enough, this is good enough. So I think it really comes down to, what do you want to do with your business? What do you want to do in your business? And do you believe that we're connected? in a sisterhood. And you and I firmly believe that.
Yes.
I know it.
Yeah.
I know it because I've had these experiences with groups of women that have changed my life. And I have been a woman who has changed a lot of lives. I don't want to move into my next realm of life and look back and say, oh, yeah, I could have told you that was going to happen. I'd rather say, hey, this happened to me. It really hurt. And I lived with the hurt. You don't have to. But I think another important thing to unpack here with your question is, do you value yourself enough to want to change this paradigm? Because when I hear you say, I can play the game, we've got the things I have to have, I'm successful, I immediately ask myself, why aren't you worth something better even than that? Because you can have money and success or whatever those ideas of success are, and you can be yourself. So why do we feel like we have to choose one or the other? And I think it's because of worth. We are not always in a place of saying, I'm worth it. I'm worth having all the success, and I'm worth being myself. As women, I think we often feel like we're asking for too much. We're expecting too much. But men do that. Men often show up as themselves at work, and they say, you know what? I also want all of these other things. But women, we tend to think, well, this is just good enough. This is good enough. So I think that goes way back into how much value do you give yourself in the world? And why aren't you worth more?
Thank you. There were a couple of things that you brought up, and words are so important. And there were two words that resonated with me, and one of them is enough and worth. Now, as a coach myself that has, that works with other women, and my core value is about the impact that I make in other women's lives. I can truly say that enough and worth comes up more times than I can even count or think of. Our worthiness comes into question. Our enoughness comes into question. What's going on? Why has this become such a core wound for us? And how can we stop the bleed? Because it's like a hemorrhage. How can we stop the hemorrhage of this not feeling worthy and our enoughness coming into question?
Yeah, and I think that for me, it's really about taking responsibility for your service to other women. Taking responsibility for supporting your sister, your aunt, your client, your neighbor. It is about being accountable to women as a collective. And when we are accountable to one another, we step up not only for ourselves, but for others. And we talk about these dark places where we have shame and we feel unworthy. We do that in community. When we're in community, we should expect that from one another. So for me, it's being accountable that if I'm holding these stories to myself and I don't share them with you, that somehow I'm accountable for that hemorrhaging. And my ancestors who experienced that, and yours, are part of your story. But we're in a place now because of them to change that, to talk about it. We don't have to fix it, but let's just bring it out into the light so its power is diminished. Let's bring it into the light. These things have been passed down, the suffering, the lack of worthiness, the smallness, the I'm enough and I shouldn't be asking for more. That's hundreds of years of human development for women. But we're here now at an unprecedented time for women in the world. And it's no accident that we're here now to say, we're not doing this anymore. We have to talk about worthiness. We have to talk about enoughness. We have to talk about our stories and the pain that's come when we haven't demanded more for ourselves. But I feel like right now, with so many women in transition in the world who have left the workforce and are out trying to figure out who they are and what they can do, the rest of us that have been down that road are accountable for stepping up and sharing those stories of worth and enoughness, and to honor our ancestors who put us finally in a position where we don't have to live like they did.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for sharing your story. I think that through our storytelling, there's so much power in that. And we have an opportunity to empower and to uplift other women, that this is our gift. And it's our birthright. And when I think of stories and storytelling throughout history, the images that conjure up for me are that multi-generational women, group of women or tribe of women coming together, from the great-grandmother, the grandmother, to the newborn baby, and how different things, knowledge, wisdom is passed on from the great-grandmother to the grandmother, from the grandmother to the daughter, and so forth and so on. And unfortunately, there has been a censorship, an erasure, basically, from our history of women's contributions and that storytelling or that gathering. It's so funny because I actually live in a town right next to Salem, Massachusetts. And Salem, Massachusetts has a history of women being burned at the stake or drowned and thought of as witches, not because they could conjure up, different things, not because they created magic, but because they gathered and gained knowledge. And it was a threat to men for women to gain knowledge, to talk amongst one another, to share information. And I think that right now, coaches, healers, leaders, this is the time for us to have a renaissance of that storytelling, to have a renaissance of that sharing our journey, of gathering together, of passing down wisdom and knowledge, or passing around wisdom and knowledge. And yes, honoring our ancestors as well.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that in many situations, you almost have to be so aware of the messaging that's coming into you from the world, because the world sends us so many signals. that we shouldn't necessarily be supporting one another, that for us to be successful, we have to compete. We get wrapped up in thoughts of scarcity. We get wrapped up in fear. And the world actually perpetuates that. Social media perpetuates it if you don't manage it. So I think you have to be aware of what's perpetuating your unwillingness or maybe uninterest in really stepping into this accountability that we're talking about, helping people, helping women become more self-aware and helping them define what success means for them. We first have to understand and be situationally aware of what's making us think that's not important.
Yeah.
What's making you think that you have to compete? What's making you think that there isn't enough for all of us? Society is often making you think that, because for years, that's a main part of why genders have been evolved the way that they have. Women were supposed to do a certain set of things, and men were supposed to do another set of things. And we've slowly broken all of those walls down. And when we see this opportunity, we have to ask ourselves, if I don't want to share my story, if I don't feel like I'm accountable in a sisterhood, if I'm not part of a community that's holding me accountable to lead, why? And I think we have to stay really curious with ourselves about answering that question.
Oh, true. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I want to transition us into the segment of the podcast I like to call diving deep. And I like to ask these questions to all of my guests. So one of them is talking about lessons and patterns. And it's often said that a lesson continues to repeat itself until we have learned what it wants to teach us. Can you tell us about one such lesson that has come up several times in your life?
Sure. So I used to think about leadership as being in compartments, right? I had to lead at work, but I didn't really have to lead at home, or I didn't have to really be a leader as a mom, or I didn't have to really be a leader as a volunteer. I only had to lead in my work because that's where my worth was tied for the most part in those early years, right? It was tied to that identity. What I realized is that leadership is a mindset, and it travels with us everywhere we go and everything we do and every identity we fill. And when I first became a parent, my husband and I really struggled to figure out what parenting was going to look like for us as a team. Was he going to lead as the parent? Was I going to lead as the parent? Where were we going to meld these two very different ideas of parenting? We went to work, and I stayed home with my son for 3 years before I opened my coaching practice. So every day I was his leader, but I was trying to embody my husband's idea of leadership, which was a bit different than mine. We're different people. We came from different backgrounds. And there was a lot of conflict about how to parent and what that was going to look like. And I remember particularly when it was time to start potty training our kiddo, we were at direct odds about, well, I told him, this is how my mom did it. You just run around in a diaper or without a diaper for 3 days. You stay home and you don't constrain them in anything. And we get excited when he uses the toilet. We stay home. We don't go anywhere. We don't do anything. We just stay home for 3 or 4 days, and he'll figure it out with love and support. And Eric's idea was, I don't want this kid peeing all over the house. What's that going to lead to? I'm not really sure. That's not the way my mom did it, because our moms came from different places, which is fine. I said, well, this is my responsibility. I'm with him all day, And how this unfolds is going to be my way, not your way. You're not even here. But it just goes to show you that all day long, we're tolerating the influences of other people's idea of success. He had an idea about how to successfully potty train, and I had an idea. But I was the leader. And to lead, I had to make a decision, even if it aggravated him, and just do it because I knew it was what was aligned with me. I understood it. I grew up that way. It made sense. And there are hundreds of those stories just as a parent. But what I think I took away from that, the lesson that you have to keep learning, because that lesson kept coming up, was that in my house, growing up, my dad was the leader. But in our house, I was really the leader. And I had to step into that role. And it was hard. There were a lot of tears. There was a lot of arguing. But I had this idea that a man in the house was supposed to lead because that's what I grew up with.
Yeah.
But in my relationship, that didn't fit. Didn't work that way. So talk about lessons that I had to keep learning until I finally realized I'm the leader in our home. When shit goes sideways, I figure out what we're going to do about it. I have to be calm. I have to sort it. My husband is there to support me, but it's just not his initiative to take. It's not how he's wired, and that's okay. We don't need two leaders like that in the house.
Yeah.
But I fought that. I didn't want that responsibility. So for years, when my kid was little, I was like, I don't want to have to make all the decisions and make all the mistakes. He's teething. He's not eating well. He peed on the carpet. He, pooped in a weird place. He said something he shouldn't have. All the things. I didn't want that responsibility, but it was mine to own.
That's a great one. Thank you. What legacy would you like to leave?
I would like to leave a legacy of being that person in your life who caused you to go back and find yourself. I want to be that person that shines a little light and walks you back to you from a place where you knew who you really were. And I want to teach you to lead from that place. Lead from that 12-year-old. For me, that's the most impactful thing I can do for the world, is to take you back to you and to teach you to lead from that anchoring point.
That's absolutely beautiful.
You're the best gift to the world.
Yeah.
You.
Do you have any last thoughts, nuggets of wisdom, anything that we didn't touch upon that you'd like our audience to have as a takeaway?
I think the most important thing I could share is that in order to really lead in every role that you fill, you have to know who you are. It is extremely hard to lead others through change if you're not in touch with who you are. So to lead, you've really got to peel back the layers, find the girl that you set aside, bring her back to the center of your work. And from there, people will follow you by example. They'll hear your story and they'll step into their own story. And that is when women can really come from an anchoring point of impact. Find out who you are and surround yourself with people who want to go on that journey with you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So for all the SheEOs out there that, are listening to you and are saying, I want to work with you. I'm ready to step into my authenticity. I notice that, I know that this is the time for me. The tipping point is there. How can they get a hold of you?
Well, I appreciate that opportunity. Anessa Collins coaching.com. You can find me there. You can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn. And I am happy to always have a conversation with you to figure out if we're in alignment and if I can support you. And my call to action to you today is to really sit with how you're feeling about yourself in your business. Sit with that. And if you're warm and fuzzy and it feels great, you're good. And if you're not warm and fuzzy and you don't feel like you've embodied yourself in your work, reach out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We'll definitely include all the deets in the description, so watch out for that. And for now, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me. Thank you so much for the gift of conversation and storytelling and sharing your story with us. I really appreciate you being with me here on Diving Deep.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Diving Deep with Denise. You can catch us on all the channels. We'll be on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube. Be sure to like us, subscribe, and also share so that we can grow our wonderful community. Until next time, bye-bye.